If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Today I had the honour of having a chat with Jenna, who is a mother living in Perth, Australia. So after deciding to leave Melbourne and change careers in 2020, she then embarked on further studies in psychology and met her partner, and they fell pregnant whilst completing her thesis. So she was in her first trimester of pregnancy and in the midst of exams and finishing up with her studies. So she's pressed pause on work. She's now embraced full-time motherhood, and she's got a little 12-week-old son, Robbie. Jenna chats to us about her pregnancy journey, her birth story, and her recovery. And there is a little bit of a warning here. Jenna does have a beautiful story into me, and when I say that, I mean she really describes some beautiful ways that she supported her postpartum recovery. She's got some great tips for pregnant women who are really interested in setting themselves up for the fourth trimester. But I do just want to let you know that her birth didn't go according to plan. So she had a 42-hour labour, which ended in an emergency caesarean. And Jenna talks us through that. And whilst it's, as I said, a birth that didn't go according to plan, and Jenna took some time to process that in the first 6 weeks or 7 weeks after birth, she has come out the other side, and she's delighted at being a, mum to a beautiful little son. So I did just want to add that little warning, because I think these sorts of stories are important to hear, but perhaps you might not be ready to hear it yet if you're approaching birth, or I'm going to leave that up to you. So I know some pregnant women love to hear all sorts, even those that don't go according to plan, whereas other pregnant women are only interested in listening to positive birth stories. And this, I would say, is a very positive birth story, but it didn't go according to plan. So, yeah. There's your warning, ladies, but there's some amazing tips that Jenna has for postpartum and the fourth trimester, and it was just a beautiful conversation with her. So do stick around. Before we do dive into this episode, I would love to invite you to join us inside Fitness Mama. If reclaiming your pelvic floor, core and strength safely is important to you and you're keen to help your body stay fit and strong during pregnancy, but also support that and nourish that postpartum recovery, then Fitness Mama is perfect for you. If you would like to join us for convenient, short, easy workouts and quality workouts created by a physio that you can do from home whilst your bubba sleeps, whilst your bubba kicks around on the mat next to you, or perhaps your toddler's running around causing havoc, or perhaps it's at the end of a long day at work, then come and join us for a free 7-day trial. It's at fitnessmama.com and the link is in the show notes. Right, let's dive into this episode with Jenna. Jenna, thank you so much for joining me today on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's an absolute honour, as always, to chat to anyone about their journey to becoming a mother. So thank you for taking the time today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Catherine. It's great to chat about all things pregnancy.
Absolutely. So you're just telling me off air your pregnancy journey started with a bit of a surprise. Let's dive straight into that, Jenna. What happened?
Yes. So my partner and I, we fell pregnant on our first try. So we hadn't really considered the first trimester period and what that would be intersecting with, which happened to be the final semester of my degree. So I was navigating those first 12 weeks with a lot of fatigue, a lot of exhaustion, and trying to manage that with the pressures of completing a degree, exams, and a thesis was not easy. But yeah, managing the excitement of the next chapter as well as the closing of a very important one, which my degree was. Yeah, it was a really exciting but challenging time.
So did you think you wouldn't get pregnant so quickly, or did you not anticipate that the first trimester you'd be so tired?
Definitely a combination of both. We just didn't think we didn't want to expect that we would fall pregnant straight away. We wanted to manage any potential disappointment of it taking a couple of months. So we just thought, let's give it a crack. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, we just keep trying. And what was your second question? Sorry, Catherine.
Oh, yeah. And did you expect that it would be so tiring?
No. I mean, you hear the cliches of the first trimester being so exhausting, but it really is something that you can't quite describe until you're in it. I've never felt fatigue like that, except postpartum. I've certainly felt fatigue that eclipses the first trimester, but at the time it was really, really difficult to get out of bed, let alone get to class and stay up late for exam preparation and writing a thesis as well.
And how did you go with those exams?
Surprisingly, very well. I don't know how. I think I knew the light was at the end of the tunnel, and I was really passionate about this second degree, which was in psychology, so far more interesting and engaging content than the first time around. So I ended up graduating last night, actually, with first class honours. So I managed to kick that goal while I was pregnant somehow, but I'm very grateful that I was able to in the end.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, good.
And what do you want to do now that you've got your psychology degree?
Well, now that I have a son, I'm not too sure, and I'm not in as much of a rush. The perspective change that comes with matrescence and becoming a mother has been really quite confronting for me, because prior to being pregnant, I was a very ambitious person. In 2020 had embarked on a career change, and part of that process was starting this degree. And it's just ironic that now at the end of that, I'm now in this new chapter of motherhood, which is very undefined in terms of how long I will make this my full-time priority. So I'm not too sure what my plans are, and that's sort of daunting but also very exciting to keep things open-ended.
Yeah, okay. So you had your first trimester. You were frantically trying to study for exams despite feeling exhausted. How was the rest of your pregnancy?
I was very lucky, I think, in the grand scheme of how pregnancy can go, particularly when speaking with some of my friends who were pregnant at the same time and who experienced daily debilitating nausea, things like that. I didn't have any nausea. I was able to maintain a really active pregnancy right up until 40 weeks. So I think that really helped with my energy levels and my mental health as well. It's so much tied into my mental well-being with movement. So maintaining that was really great and really beneficial. I think prioritising my diet in the way that I was able to, because I didn't have any food aversions either, obviously had a really beneficial effect for me and Bub as well. So as my doctor said, I had a very boring pregnancy, no complications, no drama, which was good.
Yeah, absolutely. And at what stage did you start really thinking about the birth and preparing for birth?
I was very excited about the birth and was trying to focus more on postpartum. Very early on, I had somebody say to me, which I'm grateful for, was the birth is the beginning, not the end. And so many women focus on their birth and planning for that and sort of forget about planning for postpartum. So I thought about that early on, sort of had my ideas as to how I would have loved labour to go quite early on so that I could devote a lot of time to planning after birth. But I really started feeling the anticipation build in probably the last 5 or 6 weeks, and maybe around week 34, 35 when I stopped working and started spending a lot of home, feeling that nesting urge build, knowing that birth was really on its way.
And I don't speak to a lot of people who mention what you just did in terms of you were really focused on planning for postpartum, and that's amazing to hear. What were you Like, how were you planning for postpartum during pregnancy?
I can't remember how I came across the first postpartum resource, but it was The First 40 Days, which is a book written by a lady, I forget her name, but it's probably the number one recommended book I could give. And it's basically describing how many Eastern philosophies towards pregnancy is about nurturing the mother and planning for a period of healing and nourishing yourself so that you can focus on nourishing your baby, which challenges that Western approach, which is to just bounce back and get back to your pre-pregnancy life and body, and your baby is sort of just an accessory to your original life. So once I read that, I was then sort of recommended just by internet algorithm, really, and on Instagram, Postnatal Depletion Cure by Dr. Oscar Serelak. That was another really, really valuable resource as well. So, yeah, once I started looking into those things, the algorithm just rewards you with more and more content. So
the good old Instagram algorithm.
Yeah. It's good sometimes.
Absolutely. And we are skipping ahead. I do want to go back to your birth, but in preparing for postpartum, do you feel it's been helpful?
Absolutely. Yeah. I almost wish I did more. I think I was absolutely on the right track. It was so valuable. And being on the other side of the fourth trimester now and feeling the way that I do, I almost think, gosh, imagine if I'd, been even more prepared, how much better I could have been. It's sort of, it was wonderful, and highly recommend that mums really invest the time in preparing for that phase, because there's only so much reading you can do about, the challenge of those first 6 weeks in particular. So you want to make sure that you're, reinforced by support and food in the freezer, and you've got plans in place to support yourself during a really vulnerable time.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. Well, let's dive into that a little bit more. What would be the 3 biggest things that helped you in that postpartum period?
Definitely food. That would be number one. You just don't really have time to think about grocery shopping or preparing a meal. So having, if you can, food prepared in your freezer that you can just pull out, defrost and have ready to go without having to think. Also, if you're very lucky to have family or friends around you, one way that you can ask for their support, perhaps instead of a bouquet of flowers or some more blankets or a teddy bear for the baby, can you bring me a lasagna once a week or something like that? So thinking about ways that they can support you practically. So not just food, but do you need somebody to do the cleaning for you? Do you need somebody to unstack the dishwasher? And one thing my partner and I did was we had on the fridge a to-do list of anybody who popped over and said, Jenna, how can I help? They can sort of bypass me and go straight to the fridge and read the to-do list of what needs doing. So we were very fortunate to have that support around us, that old saying, it takes a village, really rang true. Number 3, go to bed. And I know that old adage of sleep when the baby sleeps, and there's a lot of sarcasm around that. It's not that easy necessarily all the time. I found it really difficult to go to bed at 6 p.m. when he did, knowing that I'd be up just a couple of hours later and up throughout the night. But despite that difficulty in grieving, losing that time on the couch with my partner at night time, we really cherished that time together, and just going to bed made the next day so much more manageable. Yeah, so I think food, support and sleep
Oh, love that. Now, just out of interest, how did your family and, people close to you, how did you get them on board with the whole, helping out in a practical way?
I think we were just extremely lucky to have parents and family around us who had been through the experience themselves, obviously, of having children or having grandchildren. And so I think we were just incredibly lucky to have them nearby and them so willing to offer their help in exchange for cuddles with a newborn baby. Not many people would pass that up. So I think we were just really lucky in that respect. But coming from a perspective of it's really important to nurture the mother so that she can nurture her child, and that perspective helped get them on board. I think, you're not just doing this for me, you're doing it for the baby, really, because if I'm able to tend to him and focus on him, then he gets the best from me and he gets my energy. And
yeah, that's lovely. Okay, let's rewind a bit. Talk us through the lead up to your birth.
So, like I said, I was pretty active up until about week 40 when my doula, she started saying it's time to start, conserving your energy for labour. So I started winding down and just taking things easy at home. But the catch with that was my mind, spending so much time at home, would start to ruminate on what was impending. And so every little cramp or movement would make me think, is it happening? And I found week 38 to 40, a few nights a week, I would have what felt like labour or what I thought labour might feel like, which was sort of period style cramps. Sometimes they would get quite intense and regular, and I'd think, oh my gosh, it could be happening. But overnight they would dissipate and I'd wake up the next morning and be like, still pregnant. So that happened for a couple of weeks, and it started to become more of a mental game and managing the anticipation and the nerves that were building. And it was quite exhausting not knowing when. And Bub ended up being overdue, so I didn't go into labour until week 41. So once I passed my due date, it was even trickier. So it was more about managing the mental side of things towards the end.
Yeah. Okay. So you were 41 weeks pregnant. Did you go into labour naturally?
I did, yes. I went into labour the morning, 2 a.m. of the day that I was scheduled to go to the hospital and start discussing induction. So it was very good timing by him.
Yeah. And what happened?
So contractions started at 2 a.m. I was woken up by them. I was actually dreaming that I was having contractions at the hospital, and then I sort of woke up and I was like, oh, was that real? And then another one came on and it was. So I laid in bed. I didn't really go to sleep properly. I sort of would doze in between them, and I'd had nights like this, as I was saying, where they would eventually dissipate. So I was almost thinking, oh, it might not be the real onset of labour. But at 9 a.m. I got up to go to the loo and my waters broke. So it was definitely happening. And I had to ring the hospital and let them know that my waters had broken, and they had to ask me to come in and check Bub's heart rate. He was doing absolutely fine. So I had the all clear to go back home and labour there for as long as I could. I was on a birth centre program, so was hoping to birth at the birth centre here in Perth. I laboured at home for as long as I could until about 3 o'clock that very same afternoon. I ended up needing my doula to come over because I was struggling to get through them on my own already, and they were starting to approach being about 5 minutes apart for about a minute long, and that had been going on for a few hours. So I invited her over, and she really helped me get through another 11 hours. So until 2 a.m, it had been 24 hours since the first contraction. I started thinking, I think it's time to go to the birth centre and call my midwife. These are getting to the point where I'm getting scared of each contraction and thinking, I want to know how much longer I might have. So I know some mothers don't want to know and are worried that might throw them off. I had the opposite experience. I felt like if I knew, that might give me a greater sense of control. And labour is one of those things in life you just have absolutely no control. So I think I struggled with that a little bit in hindsight. So we got to the birth centre and they checked me. I asked to be checked and I was 5 centimetres. I'd had a few meltdowns when I was at home where my doula thought, oh, maybe she's actually approaching transition, because I was starting to get really quite panicky and struggling to manage my psychology during contractions. So I knew that it was quite difficult. And when I was told I was only 5 centimetres, I thought, oh gosh, we might still have a really long way to go. So we laboured in the birth centre for 4 more hours, and during that time there were other ladies giving birth, and I heard a baby being born. I heard it crying, and that sort of threw me off. It really was a mental game and staying sort of focused on my own sort of progress. But hearing that baby threw me off, and I remember thinking, gosh, I wonder how long it's going to be till that's me, till it's over. And things weren't really progressing, but the contractions were extremely painful, and they almost didn't feel right. Part of me knew something wasn't quite right. I can't explain why. So I was insisting that I be checked. My midwife, obviously being at a birth centre where it's an intervention-free philosophy, was trying to encourage me to hang in there and minimise that intervention, because when I wasn't in labour, that was really what I wanted. I wanted my doula to advocate for me to have as minimal intervention as possible. But when you're feeling that level of pain and exhaustion, things did change for me. So I was checked again, and in that 4 hours I had only progressed 1 centimetre. And I just burst into tears and I said, I'm done. I can't continue like this. I need to go upstairs and get some pain relief. So fortunately the birth centre is attached to the hospital, so it was a 2-minute wheelchair ride to a hospital room where I was able to get some strong nitrous oxide. And that helped, but they needed to, because we were approaching 24 hours since my water had broken, they wanted to accelerate things. So I received synthetic oxytocin to speed up the labour, and that intensified the contractions to the point where I needed an epidural. So I had an epidural, and once that kicked in, I was able to relax and get a little bit of rest. During that time, I progressed to 10 centimetres, and by this point, I think it was about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So it had been a long time. And because he was doing so well, that his vitals were never affected by the contractions or anything, they were sort of not in much of a rush, which was interesting. But we had a number of staff handovers as well, so there were always delays in updates as to how I was going, which is a bit of a caveat of the system, I suppose. And once I'd approached 10 centimetres, they helped me into an all-fours position to try start coached pushing. And he wasn't moving. I just didn't have the strength to push. They could see him. He was probably 5 centimetres from coming out, but he just wasn't really moving. So they started to recommend using assisted delivery, forceps or a vacuum. I had to consent to that. I was really quite upset by this point that I hadn't had the natural birth, the intervention-free birth that I really hoped for, particularly because I'd had such an easy pregnancy. I thought that would translate to an easy birth, and it just doesn't necessarily. Labour is a lottery, which is something that I've heard, and that really rung true for me. Anyway, so we ended up choosing a forceps and an episiotomy because a vacuum required you having the strength to assist in pushing, and I just couldn't. So I was taken up to theatre, and when the forceps were administered, they weren't locking onto my son's head properly. So we couldn't work. They weren't working. They failed. So we ended up having to have a caesarean. So by that point, I just said, just do whatever you need to do to get him out. I'm just so exhausted. So this was hour 42 by this point, 8 o'clock. The very following day. So, my partner, he sat down next to me in the theatre, and curtain went up, and we were just chatting, expecting it to be maybe another 45 minutes till we saw the baby. And in mid-conversation, we just hear this cry. And we thought, oh my gosh, was that a baby? And they just told him up, and there he was. And it was over so quickly in the end. So, yeah, I was delirious, exhausted, but when he was put on my chest, it just sort of went to the back of my mind straight away. He was here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a journey.
Indeed. Quite a journey, and the polar opposite to what I had hoped for, really. I wanted intervention-free, natural, and I pretty much received every intervention under the sun.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear of your experience, that it wasn't as you'd hoped. How long were you pushing for?
Well, I was fully dilated at 2 p.m. and he wasn't born until 8. So he was really in my birth canal for 6 hours.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And that decision for forceps was made pretty much in that last hour or so before he was born.
So your baby's on your chest after a mammoth, huge journey to get there. How has recovery been, considering you've effectively had a vaginal birth and a caesarean birth? How's the physical recovery going?
Well, he's 13 weeks tomorrow, so I feel mostly better now. The first immediate aftermath of recovering from a C-section was incredibly confronting. I required a catheter for 10 days. My bladder was completely offline, so I didn't have any urge or sensation to go and couldn't. So carrying a newborn baby and your back of your own urine was really, really difficult in those first week, let alone, the pain of the major abdominal surgery that you have, and just general afterbirth pains. I felt so weak in my core. I just had no strength, and the back pain of learning to breastfeed and, those awkward positions that you have to be in holding your baby for extended periods just meant that recovery was exhausting physically. Didn't help me mentally that when my baby had arrived, I hadn't slept for 42 hours and had been through what I had and was sort of navigating or processing what I'd just been through. So, the first couple of weeks, really quite a blur now looking back on it, but I look at photos every now and then and I just think I was so swollen and hunched over and feeling very sorry for myself, I suppose. But and the exhaustion of having a newborn doesn't help either. You don't get to recover overnight, with a good night's sleep.
It sounds like a total roller coaster ride with a crash landing at the end.
Yeah.
But you've got a beautiful baby.
That's it. But sometimes, saying, oh, but look what you've got, it does sometimes invalidate the grief that is very important for some women to feel and to process. And so I would feel like, oh my gosh, I really shouldn't complain about the extreme pain that I'm in right now, because look at my beautiful baby who I love and I can't imagine life without him. So there's a lot of tension with how you're feeling. You're processing grief and the most incredible love you've ever experienced at the same time.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I'm going to link 2 previous podcast episodes where I've chatted, I don't have them at hand, but one's with a psychologist where we talk about exactly this, processing the birth and healing after a birth. Yeah, so there's 2 podcast episodes that I will link. I wish I knew them off the top of my head.
No, that's all good.
But you're absolutely right. Yes, you do have a beautiful baby now, and yes, but you're absolutely right in terms of what you still went through is a validated emotion and that you don't need to brush under the carpet and we can process and
and verbalize them and complain, be a little, wallow a little bit if that helps you eventually come out the other side having felt that, the release that can come from a good cry session. There were plenty of those.
And was there anything that helped you to process your birth in particular?
Time. That's it, really, just time. And once you start to get to know your baby and get your rhythm, and everybody was saying, just hang in there, it gets easier. And I remember thinking, stop saying that, because I can't really comprehend when it's going to get easier. But it did. I'm one of those annoying people now who just says that. So it was just the passing of time. And now I do look back on it and I do still think, wow, that was full on. But I found myself for the first 6 or so weeks just talking about it almost incessantly. Anyone who would ask, I'd go on this and I'd be like, I'm so sorry, just don't ask me about it, because I'm finding myself really wanting to talk about it or write it down. But eventually that must have helped, because it's just not really happening that much anymore.
And did you find you're having flashbacks?
Not really. Flashbacks, not really, not involuntary ones. I was definitely going back to them and trying to – there's a lot I don't remember. I don't remember getting from the theatre to my hospital room, for example. There was so much that, I guess, the cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol after going for so long. A lot of women say you forget the pain of labour, and maybe that's what I'm going through. Yeah, so sometimes going back to it was helping me to sort of piece together what happened. And for a while I was trying to do that, to understand why. Was there a point where I should have waited or should have done something differently, trying to get some certainty as to what happened. But I've really let go of that now, and I'm at peace with probably never knowing why things panned out the way that they did, and that's okay.
And you're now 13 weeks, and you mentioned that time helped. How much time did it take for you to feel more at ease with what had happened?
Probably a bit longer than 6 weeks. 6 weeks seems to be this magic number where you wake up on the 6th week and you're back to normal. That wasn't the case for me. I remembered still being quite concerned about the lack of strength I had in my abdominals then, and the pain I was still experiencing with my back, and just not feeling, definitely not feeling my pre-pregnancy self, still not feeling that fully yet. But I'd say at around maybe 8 weeks, things started to really take a turn. I followed the first 40 days principles as much as I could and stayed at home for that first 40 days. I got out probably once or twice. Yeah, twice. So post then, between week 7 and 8, when I was getting out more, that helped my mental health. That helped lift. I sort of got a sense of life before pregnancy. Not that I would go back to it, but just, being out amongst society again and having a cup of coffee with my partner and things like that really helped me shift into this new normal and feel good again.
Yeah, great. And let's talk about postnatal recovery, because that's my jam.
Yeah.
How are you helping to prioritise your recovery, like physically? And as you mentioned, your abdominals feel really weak. What sort of things are you doing?
Yeah, so again, coming back to food, I think nourishing yourself, eating plenty of protein, healthy fats, lots of collagen-rich, slow-cooked meat, I really do think has helped me feel better sooner, as opposed to if I was eating foods perhaps less abundant in those things to help with tissue repair. But slowly getting back into exercise, definitely not rushing. I did barely anything those first 6 weeks. I really just tried to prioritise my rest. The hospital I was at offered physiotherapy exercise classes that were tailored to postpartum bodies. So really gentle strength building exercises, gentle abdominal work. I did have some degree of diastasis recti. I still do have some separation. So I had to tailor things even more and take the core work a little more gently again. But doing something every day to just gently move my body, whether it's just some stretching, rolling out on a foam roller, doing a little bit of, crunches or squatting, gentle, walking. So really just easing back into it. I go to a couple of Pilates classes a week, which was a lifesaver during pregnancy for my mobility. So slowly getting back into those things, but definitely putting pause on any significant weight loading exercises that I was doing pre-pregnancy for a bit longer.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And more so, like research is just showing that first 6 weeks, we really do want to have a protective approach to the pelvic floor and core. Just like if you had a hip replacement or a knee reconstruction, you wouldn't be going out doing strength work. Yeah. It would be definitely about the protect and then getting into the gradual, slow rehab plan. So it sounds like you're handling that all really well.
Yeah, I think if you can, finding a pelvic health physiotherapist is a fantastic resource, because she said to me at my 3-week appointment, you don't get these 6 weeks back. You need to, give your body its best shot to recover within this first period, and that was gold advice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, in Australia, not women, we don't have that as an option. Some countries do now have a pelvic floor assessment offered to all women who've had a baby. But I believe in Australia, and this is quite a new change, that if you've had a 3rd and 4th degree tear, you now get access to a pelvic floor physio. So we're taking steps in the right direction, but if anyone can afford it, or definitely go see a pelvic floor physio. And if you can't afford it, but you've got issues with concerns with incontinence, prolapse, or anything at all, you can actually get a referral to your local continence clinic. So for anyone listening, if you think I really need to see someone but I can't afford it, go and have a chat to your GP and see what's in your local area. There might be a really long wait list, but it might be worth getting yourself on the wait list. Yeah. Sorry, a bit of a tangent there, Jenna.
No worries.
So, Jenna, you've taken us on an incredible journey that you've had. You've talked us through your pregnancy, your birth. You've talked about how, things that you've done to really help with your recovery. So you've shared so much. To wrap this up, because I am mindful of your time, but is there anything you would want, any final words that you'd like to mention, any final words of wisdom for women who are listening today who might be pregnant or who've had a baby?
Yeah, I think for me, and I'd love to pay that forward, it's remembering that birth is the beginning. And if you can prioritise your postpartum period, I think that's the best thing you can do to set yourself up for a really magical first 12 weeks with your newborn baby. And, bolster yourself against the challenges of no sleep, not being able to feed yourself as well as you'd like, not being able to move your body in a way that really nourishes your mental well-being as well. So invest plenty of time into your postpartum recovery. I think that's really critical. And for me, not having the labour and the birth that I would have liked, a lesson from that in my subsequent pregnancies, if I'm lucky enough to have one, will be to let go of expectations and not be so rigidly bound to a birth plan. Maybe consider a birth flowchart where you've got a little bit more flexibility with, okay, if this happens, then here's what I'm open to, and just consider the full spectrum of possibilities.
Yeah, I love that. I love the term birth map as well. You've got your starting point and your destination and then all the different routes that you can get there.
Love that, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for coming and chatting to us. I do appreciate the time, and I get this beautiful aura of calmness when I talk to you, and I can tell you're just really loving this stage that you're in.
Yeah, loving
with your bubs. So
loving it. Wouldn't change a thing now that I'm here. It's just, can't imagine life without him. So thank you so much, Catherine. It's been really wonderful to chat to you.
Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Jenna and how to trial Fitness Mama for free 7 days. That's it, ladies. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.